So I have some regrets because I asked Rob to read the first two books of ACOTAR because I swore to him that if he got through the second book, he would be sold and want to continue reading the series. However, after reading both those books again myself, I'm not so sure if I made the right call. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Reading Crossbow podcast. My name is Lana, and I'm here with my co-host Rob. And I'm just, you always say you're excited to be here, but are you this time?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about this book series because it really came at an unexpected angle for me.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of shows like Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, Sons of Anarchy, and so I'm actually kind of jealous that you picked the first book we've covered on the show that has a villain as its lead.
Wow. Okay, so I was not prepared for that. It doesn't say, you haven't said whether or not you like the book, but it at least appears to me that you like the main character. So I might say this wrong because book talk and everybody kind of argues on over how it's said. I think it's Rhysand, but some people say Rhysand. So we might have to choose. But so you like this character?
I wouldn't say I like him, but I definitely feel like he is a very likable lead, especially considering, all of the, villainous things he's up to throughout this book.
So let's get down to like the whole basis of this episode because we're going to do this a bit differently than we normally do. And we did it differently on the last episode when we talked about the first book of ACOTAR. So first book, A Court of Thorns and Roses. Second book, A Court of Mist and Fury. And I swore to you that if you got through this second book, you would be like addicted, like everyone on Book Talk is. And we should just cut to the chase right now. Was it worth it? Let's just start with that. Do you feel like if you, after reading the second book, you would continue?
I don't know if I would continue without prompting from you, but I feel like I understand why people like this. It's just I honestly this is not the book for me.
Okay, that's fair, but let's tackle why. And before we tackle why, I kind of want to talk about something that I talked about in the intro of the show, which even myself, I'm starting to feel like, am I as attracted to these characters as I was when I first read this? Because when I first read this, I hadn't had this type of adult fantasy really before. I'd experienced some Sarah J Maas, but I had recently got off, you guys have heard this a million times, reading Mistborn, Brandon Sanderson, that whole series. And so this came to me like, ooh, sexy, shiny new thing. But coming back to it kind of opens up my eyes a bit. And I want to talk about that.
Okay.
But I want to talk about it from some angles that you brought up. Because I remember when we talked about the first book, you said one of the things that bothered you most about the first book was that the characters seemed to lack agency. And I told you that by the second book, the character would gain it all back again. And I'm curious, did that happen for you?
I feel like a lot of my reservations or my criticisms of the first book definitely did get at least remedied during this book. There's definitely a lot more agency. You get a little bit more of the actual world itself and not just the self-contained house that they live in. So I feel like you do get a lot more to this world. And, Feyre's agency, she definitely, as you described, comes into her power quite literally with the boon of special, almost superpowers that she's gained from her resurrection. And so I do feel like a lot of those things did improve from the first book.
Okay, that is fair. I'm curious, though, is this book an upgrade compared to the first book? Because you did not like the first book and you expressed distaste. Is the second one better?
Yeah, I would say it's better. But of the 3 Sarah J Maas books we've covered, I definitely prefer the Crescent City still. Of the 3, that's what I would prefer.
Me too. I'm hyped for that one because there's more books for Crescent City coming out, and there's supposed to be another ACOTAR book coming out. And when I look at both of them equally, I'm like, yeah, I really want Crescent City. Also, those of you we've talked about this before, they are supposed to cross over. So I'm curious about that because you actually do like Crescent City. If it does really cross over, it's most likely going to cross over with the main characters from this second book. And you also got introduced to the other characters, which we're going to hit in a minute. Do you think you'll experience some sort of FOMO if we read Crescent City, or if you continue on with that and get to the part where these two overlap? Will you feel like you would have needed it? And I know I'm asking that knowing we're not there yet.
Yeah, and this is actually something that comes up like if you'd watched the WB like Arrowverse series, the different shows on the CW, like where they had the Flash and Green Arrow and that kind of stuff, where those shows all crossed over. And if you were watching it when it came out, it was a boon. Like it was hugely, influential that these things crossed over. But if you're watching it after the fact, it's actually kind of a pain because now you actually have to like stream different episodes in an odd order just to get it to work. And I that would be my biggest fear with this, is that one series might not make sense without the other one. So it has to be handled very carefully. And I don't know whether that's going to be the case. And I'm not going to judge something that actually hasn't even happened yet.
Fair, fair. Okay, I think that Sarah J Maas wouldn't bring characters in the next Crescent City book that weren't introduced in this second book. So, going to take a pause real quick to kind of go backwards to something I should have said at the beginning of the episode, which is we're not going to dive into these books in depth. We already did that on our first ACOTAR episode, and honestly, if you haven't read these books, then you're under a rock. If you haven't even heard of these books, just go on TikTok, just go to Book Talk, watch a couple TikToks, and you'll understand basically what's going on and why people want to read these. So not diving into that too much, but I do want to touch on the second book because I think there's things about the second book that made me fall in love with it, that made me want to keep reading, and I'm curious if it did that for you. And the main one is the characters. Because in the first book, we had Tamlin, and we had the Spring Court mostly. We got a little bit of Amarantha, who's this evil character who lives under a mountain, and she casts this curse over the land, and blah, 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 blah. Very fairy tale. This one, we get away from the fairy tale, and we get into more of the depth of the story. And that's done through the characters that we find in the Night Court, which continue on through the entire series. And in the Night Court, we have Rhysand, Amren, the Morrigan, Cassian, and Azriel. And this is the band, right? They're all together in this book. How did you feel about those characters? And did they bring the feelsies to this book for you that I'm saying they brought for me?
I do feel like this kind of found family as this group kind of functions as. I think they do work very well as a group just because they have this kind of, it really reminded me of Divergent, where they're just the cool people, the cool cast from like that Divergent series, where you kind of, they're set up as someone you want to be around. That's the goal of this, because they come across as they're just cool and modern and exciting. It's almost over the top as far as for how cool all of these characters are.
I thought you'd really bond with Cassian. I don't know why, and we're not to the books where I thought that you would bond with Cassian. Those are coming. But like first impressions, Cassian as a character. Is this a Rob character, or did I miss?
I think the character that I would have picked for myself to be the character I would like would actually be like Azriel, because he is the
Shadow Daddy.
The thief and the spy master, the murderer. That's his job. That's not what he is. It's just his job. But I actually think the character that kind of stood out the most is actually, I think it's Amren, the ancient, fey-shaped creature, because I think there's a lot to that character. There's almost it's hard to describe. There's this ancient evil about this character, but almost in a redeemed way, because she's been trapped in this form for at least a very long time and is just trying to figure out how this world works. But, well, and she's not really figuring out, she obviously is very aware of it, but as she's explained to the characters or to the reader, I found her character to be very interesting and compelling. As far as I'm a lot more curious about her character. But I think the character I actually liked the most, honestly, was actually Nesta, because she's such a jerk. I like that character, and I was trying to figure out, because you had mentioned that she's played a big role in the future, and so the whole book, I was actually waiting for her to, like, how does she get brought into this world? Because she obviously hates the Fae and is standoffish and mean about it. And so I found her character to be kind of the one I was kind of most interested in paying attention to.
So you gave me a lot to unpack there, and you saw me react. I'm just like blown away. First of all, let's start with Azrael, because I really thought you'd bond with like the Cassian kind of brute type, and you're like, no, I'm a total shadow daddy, and I'm gonna like be murderous in the background. My mind was like, does your wife know this? No, I don't know. It was just, you don't have to give me a comment on that if you don't want to, but I think I was just shocked.
I think the nature of his character, where he's the, he does the questioning and the spy master stuff. I think I found that to be an interesting character that I would have thought you would have maybe picked for me. But ultimately, like I said, I think it's actually kind of the Nesta and Amren that actually stood out the most.
Okay, I want to unpack these separately, okay? Because it's interesting. We're also going to get into spoilers on this book. So if you guys are here to like just learn about ACOTAR, it's not the place. Again, go to TikTok. We're talking about like, should you continue with the ACOTAR series? We're going to hit all these things. Do I have regret? Did Rob like it? All of that. But dissecting this character right now, going into spoilers, you brought up Nesta. So I do not place Nesta for you, but now that you said it, it makes sense. And now I think you'd really love the Nesta book. Gosh, Nesta just throws the FU to the whole world. And she does it right at the end of the book. So at the end of the book, they become part of the Fae world. It sucks, but they basically throw the sisters into the cauldron and they become Fae. They do this as almost like a test for these witches. It's a long story. But anyway, everyone else just kind of goes in. Maybe they're sad or whatever, but Nesta, she fights it and she goes in like bird up, like she's cursing it. And apparently when she comes out, she takes something from the cauldron. She's such a force to be reckoned with, even in the human world. The fairy world's like, yo, what the hell? And she like took something. So anyhow, I guess I'm not that surprised that maybe you'd like her more, because you do kind of like the, F the world kind of stuff. What did you think about that scene? I'm curious. That's the end of the book.
I actually thought the scene was going to go very differently, because they said this process, you needed a very strong will to survive this process, and I was expecting actually Elaine to not make it, and then Nesta seemed like the obvious choice she would. And so when the scene was happening, I thought this was going to be start off as a tragedy. And
okay.
It very much is not.
Well, I'm going to have to give you some spoilers. I don't think this will make you continue to read, but, I think you should know what happens, since you might not read the books. I shouldn't say you're not, but you might not. But the Nesta book I do think you'll like. So you should know that Elaine does not come out of this unscathed. She was not strong enough. You'll find out in the other books she is not whole. And it did mess with her brain. It messed with her mind. All of us who've read all of the books now are like, it's been three more books of her. I think three more books of her being little cuckoo clocks. And she starts to come into some power, but she like mutters off weird stuff and chants weird things, and she doesn't make sense. And your shadow daddy Azrael feels like she's the little wounded pet, and he wants to take care of her. And there's a little soft spot developing there. However, in the last book, he starts mentoring females to become part of these warriors that he's a part of, which they never have been before. And he forms a bond with one of them that everyone wants. Literally everyone who reads this series is like, them. But there's a bonus Azrael chapter where he gets a bit, or he wants to get, we are in his head, freaky with Elaine. But Elaine, again, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. So I want to tell you that.
Okay.
Now let's talk about Amren, because I don't know if this will convince you to read either. but you should know. So I told you in the last episode, A Court of Thorns and Roses, that this book series, as it progresses, goes into the old gods. So Sarah does build a very, very big world. Not only do
Okay.
we have Pyrithian, we have these human worlds, the fairy lands. We have lands that are beyond that, which I'm going to throw a nod to Farah's dad. Interesting. So, and then we have what began before. And we got a little taste of that with the cauldron because it's magical and it existed before everything else. So Amren is that. Amren is an old god, so I'm spoiling that for you, but I don't think it spoils this series. I think you can kind of guess.
I think it
And
was
we learned
strongly,
about that.
yeah, I think it was very
Yes,
strongly hinted at that she's something
yes,
else from beyond.
yes, exactly. And so they go into the mountain at one point to go to the bone carver, and he's basically one of those old gods too. So these kind of monsters slash old gods play a huge part in the story, but not until the final books. But that's when I think you would really enjoy Amren as well, because she steps into that part of herself. All right, so we talked about Amren, but there's one missing piece because I actually am starting to believe you might kind of like this book. I might be able to talk you into liking this book. I'm not so sure because you said you liked Rhysand as a villain. And I loved Rhysand as a villain too. So tell me a little bit more about this because I think it's kind of special.
So, I mean, I think a lot of people, when I just look around online, kind of put Rhysand as basically being this almost anti-hero type of trope. But from this book, I very much feel like he is the big boss, the final boss villain of this series, because everything about this book series paints him as being that kind of master villain. And I'm curious on, it doesn't sound like that's going to pay off, but that's how it feels like in this book, because like when they're comparing like him versus Tamlin, like at every opportunity he starts to almost, when he's talking to Feyre, he starts to talk to her and say something very similar to what maybe Tamlin would have said or done, and then all of a sudden he switches and goes the very positive route, almost like he can read minds and knows what she wants to hear. You know, he's also a very person that can absolutely gaslight people because with his mental mind control and erasing of memories. You know, he even has this aspect where like he seems like he's trying to make for a better world, but in like the laziest way possible. Like he's like, the Court of Nightmares is absolutely awful, so I'm just going to let them do their own thing and I'm going to, you know, enjoy life in the Court of Dreams. Or I want to improve women in the military, but I'm not going to really enforce the rules of making them actually be trained just when I'm present. And so he has that, you know, villain with a few positive attributes. So he's more of a, at best, an anti-villain, but he very much feels like he's going to be that final boss villain of this series. And if this is where it goes, I'd be very curious to find out how it gets there, because it feels like it's there in plain sight for me.
Oh, I don't know what to tell you about that. Rhysand was a tough character for me. I gotta say, and I want him to have the arc for you, but I also played into that in the second book of like, ooh, he's gonna be kind of naughty. He's gonna be kind of mean, and I think this is the book where you get the strongest version of that of him, because the longer this goes on, the more he's a softie. So now he's one of those like I forget what the name of the trope is, but it's the "what did you say to her" kind of moment with like mates because they're mated. So with Farah, he's just like, in my home, in my family, in Valaris, you do not touch, right? And in this place and in that world, he exists as a sweet person. And anytime out of that world, he's awful, but not awful enough because you're in his head a lot or you're in Feyre's head a lot. So you also kind of hear the, I'm just acting this way. Like you kind of get this a lot. Whereas like, I almost wish we were out of their heads sometime and in someone else's head. Kind of like we were for the first book, actually, A Court of Thorns and Roses, where he storms into their house on Amarantha's behalf and is like, he's basically there to sniff out the situation and see if the curse is about to be broken. And they hide Feyre behind Lucian, and he's just being awful and like putting Tamlin down and basically kiss my boot kind of man. And I wanted more of that, and I hate to tell you that we actually don't get that much more of it.
I mean, it seems surprising because it very much feels like this. It's not even that I want him. The thing about like having a Breaking Bad or a Sopranos type of villain is, in the end, you do want to see them get their just desserts. You know, you do want to see them be punished for what they're doing and how awful they've been. And if he's being, if that's being backed off on, then you might not get that. So that seems unfortunate. But
yeah,
obviously you mentioned in the intro that you don't quite feel the same way about this book. So what's changed? How did these characters change from your first reading to your second?
It's tough to say, but I think it's the Sarah J Maas effect in reverse. So I think they're calling her like the queen of fantasy right now, the queen of romantic, not just romantic fantasy, but like of fantasy, because there's not really another woman like her that's made this impression. Now, there's obviously other female authors that are doing really amazing in this genre, but after her. And so, you know, she's wrote all the big ones, the ACOTAR series, the Crescent City series, the Throne of Glass series, and she's only continuing to keep going. She's building up this massive empire, and that's what draws you in with her. Is it's like, yes, this is amazing, but then you kind of get off the train a little bit of like, okay, I've had too much of this. It's like eating a bowl of ice cream. Someone puts it in front of you, and you're like, oh, so good, right? And then you get a tummy ache. Like, I feel like it's like a tummy ache of this. Like, and now other authors are just copying her. And we've brought this up before. And you brought this up because you talked about Red Rising and the Hunger Games. And once like a publisher or a publishing group, you know, gets on like this is popular, they just make more of it. And I feel like we're in that time of just making so much of it. And on my last episode, I talked about, am I getting burnt out? So I almost don't even know if it's fair to ask me, because if you ask someone that's on the verge of burnt out, they're gonna give you a burnt out answer. So, but yeah, in my mind right now, I'm just a bit burnt out on it. And I've read these one time all the way through, and then I audiobooked them because I thought, I did this on like runs. I wanted something familiar where if I needed to stop and, you know, I could, so I listened to these. And then I read not the first one, but the second one again, just to like read it for you on this. I'm 3 times into this, and I'm forgetting what I loved about it. And let me tell you the things I loved about it. I loved the banter, the back and forth when they're writing notes. To me, as like a woman who loves love stories, like in old school note writing and sending letters, I thought this was such a sweet way for Rhysand to make her fall in love with him. And it was like witty too, and it was naughty, and he was like basically making her say stuff like Rhysand is great in bed or whatever. Like, it was just fun. It was good fun, and they're basically sending them through the time warp mail, which was adorable. So I loved that, and that didn't change. But there's parts of it that did change. Like, there's a moment right where before they become mated, where she gets pissed off at him because she finds out he knew the whole time and should have told her, and she wanders off, or she gets sent off to this cabin in the woods to go brood about it and be mad. And he eventually comes crawling back. It took him forever to fly there since he couldn't magic himself there, and they basically finish the mating sequence. And basically when she's in there, she's painting and stuff, and she's painting like her friend's eyes on the walls. And the first time when I read that, it wasn't weird, but the second time when I read it, it felt weird. And some things that people make fun of online that have now kind of hit me, like, oh, so they decide to get married because she makes him soup. Like, it really did happen in that book, and I couldn't unhear it. The first time I read it, it was sweet. She's casually just kind of cooking in there. That's all they have. It's a can that's on the shelf. She's not thinking about it. And then he tells her, by the way, you know, one of our rights after you get mated and how we seal the deal is you make me a meal. But she was just already making the soup she had on the shelf. And the third time I read it, I'm like, well, now this feels really dumb. So I don't know, Rob. There's just parts of it reading it again where I'm like, is this as good as I thought it was? Is this just silver tarnished? I don't know.
So one of the things related to what you just said, which is basically their soulmate or their fated mates, this concept, And one of the things I liked about this compared to, I think, one of the other books we covered is that this doesn't feel like a one way, you know, no choice situation. Like, like a person can say, no, I don't want this. I don't like this person. Or Rhysand's parents, he makes it clear his mom and his dad did not like each other. They very much, went their own ways after he was around, because, so just because someone has this soulmate doesn't even mean they have to like each other or have to stay together. And I liked that out. And it actually felt to me, it actually in a way was reinforcing this villain trope that I was seeing, because I was like, this gives her, she's not trapped to this, awful person just because he has, a giant wingspan. So
I like that you brought that up because one thing that does make Sarah J Maas attractive as an author and ACOTAR attractive as a series is what you just said, which is she does expand so much more on all these concepts. I think a lot of authors just get into those tropes, and now that she's broken the tropes, fated mates just aren't fated mates. You aren't just attracted to each other. Weird. And spoiler for you, because again, I don't think you're gonna read into this, but a great example is Elaine and Lucian. The big cliffhanger at the end of the first book was Elaine goes into the pot, she comes out, she's Fae. Lucian stares at her and says, "You're my mate." Okay. So something you should know as the series goes on, and we don't know if this is because Elaine's brain is broken or what's going on, but she does not want him. She makes it very clear she does not want him. And as the book series go on, another weird question mark is there's references, but it's never outwardly says it, where Lucian almost seems drawn to a male figure. And that's unanswered. So they're mated, but was that a broken thing with the pot? Because she comes out broken? Is that even a match? It's completely unanswered, and she does throw these wrenches into the tropes that are out there, and I think that's another reason why I'm drawn to her. And we even get that a bit in Crescent City too. We get some breaking of all that, and rewriting of it all. Like for example, in some of her other books, you have to bite one another. Like there wasn't biting in this one. Just she changes it with the series that she writes.
So having read this now even up to 3 times, do you feel like your first time liking this, was it maybe just the shock, that this was so different to what you were used to, and now rereading it, that's what's the problem, is that the shock factor is no longer there? Or is it just that you've maybe grown as a reader since you first discovered these books?
It's not the last one, because I read a lot before these books, and I've wanted to maybe talk about it or do a show where I talk about some of this series and different times I fell in love with books. For example, I went through a major John Grisham phase and read tons of lawyer books, and then I went through a major Patricia Cornwell phase where I read murder mysteries and the Scarpetta novels, and I'm 20 plus books into that, the Stephanie Plum series, and I've read hundreds and hundreds, probably getting close to, maybe I'm over 1,000 books now. So I don't think I've grown as a reader more. I think I'm just exhausted. I do think it was some of the TikTok rush, the book talk trending, this going nuts and me wanting to get into this. But also, I did an episode on this where Sarah J Maas knows the reader base. She lured us in with Beauty and the Beast. I have always said if I were to be a Disney princess, I would be Belle. And so you write me a modern day book about Belle falling in love with the Fae? Okay, so the first book drew me in. It wasn't a good book. I've said that. I don't think it's a great book, but it was a gateway book. And she's an excellent author for your gateway into getting into romantic fantasy. And I still think it's a great series for that. I just think reading again, you just tend to see the holes a bit more. And also I'm in that burnt out phase. Like I said, like I don't know that I want romantic fantasy at all right now. I think my next few books I'm going to pick might just be a little bit of a break. Okay, so to wrap this up, though, we've kind of answered my question. Am I done with this? Was it the same as it was the second, third time? But on to you now. Like, was this worth it for you? And kind of a two-parter, do you understand why readers really love the ACOTAR series?
So for me, I think it was very useful to help me understand what these trends and these tropes and all this is really about, because this is incredibly popular online and people love this series. And so, I did really want to understand why that is. And I think I get it. These are very easy to read, very consumable books. They, it's, and even the what you would call the spicy scenes, they seem like they fall generally right after a normal, like, literary climax. So it's kind of that coming down period. Even the book starts off with one because the last book left off right after the fight with Amarantha. So this book starts off essentially with a spicy scene. I get why people like that, but I do I like these characters? Do I want to spend more time in this world? And realistically, my answer is no. I don't. I'll give it to Bryce from Crescent City. I find her character to actually be a lot more interesting, despite the fact that these books were actually easier to read because they flow off the page so much easier, because there's a whole lot less of that exposition, that dump that we got in the first half of Crescent City. So these read so easily, and so I get why people like these. And I think it's actually very good that if this is what gets people back into reading, then read the smut. I don't like, if that gets you reading fantasy, that's terrific. And who am I to fault you for reading that?
I love that you said that, because one of the ways that men in particular are getting into reading these is often with tandem reading with their wives. And you'll see a lot of TikToks where the husband reads it out loud and it's their end of night time. A lot of couples read this before bed. I know at least 3 couples that I know personally that are now on the second and third books, because it's slower to read it this way, a chapter at a time. And for some of them, they're talking about, see, I love how Rhysand does this, or I love how Rhysand, didn't fully commit with her at that one night in the end. I love that he waited. I understand why. And they talk about, because a lot of women love the male characters in these books, so it's great for them to build that up with their significant others. So I see a lot of that. You don't have to answer this. It's okay if you say no. I'm curious, do you think that your wife would enjoy, like, reading this out loud? Maybe at the end of the night, you guys spending time together reading these books.
I don't think she would want to read that with me, because I think I would basically be trying to theorize too much about, oh, this is where he's gaslighting Feyre in this scene. I think she would probably not enjoy that nearly as much as a couple's bonding experience.
Okay. Well, you said you talk through movies sometimes too, and I'm like, I
Yeah.
could see you doing that in the book. Oh, you see, like, I bet what's gonna happen next, and I would rip it out of your hands and smack you over the head with it, like, if that happened. So yeah. Anyhow, that's kind of what's going on. That's why I see more men getting into this. I think it's cool. I agree with you. If that's what gets you to read, awesome. If that's what gets you to bond in your partnership, awesome. What a great thing that these books exist and people are getting more into reading and talking about things like this out loud. That's cool.
Yeah, and if it
All right.
and it's so and if it serves as your gateway into better books, even better.
Better books. Okay. All right. So let's just answer this once and for all. Will you read on your own through the rest of the series?
No. Not the
Who would you
series.
recommend this series for?
I'm not sure, because what I think I found in most of these romanticises is actually how, funny enough, how dark they really are. Because, like, in a lot of ways they can be more brutal. Think about, like, Fourth Wing. They can almost be more brutal than a lot of the grimdark books that I actually really like. So I think the audience, it can cast a wide net of who might like this. But who is it not for? Probably the really prudish people that can't stomach one spicy scene per book.
All right, so let's sum this up. You guys get to do that for us in the comments, actually. If you're like me and have read a book and read it again and you're questioning why you loved it to begin with, I'd love to hear what that series is. If you've read multiple books multiple times and you keep falling in love with it more every single time and it's the opposite, then what books are those? Tell us all about it in the comments below.
Thanks again, and do all the YouTube things, like and subscribe. We very much appreciate your viewership, so thank you.